I always thought the quietest part of the night was around 2 a.m. That's when the traffic dies down, the neighbors are asleep, and even the stray dogs stop barking. It's just silence. The night the blackout happened, I woke up right in the middle of that silence. At first, I didn't know why. My room was pitch black. The digital clock beside my bed was off, which immediately told me the power had gone out. The house felt different without the low hum of electricity. I reached for my phone and turned the screen on. 2:17 a.m. I was about to roll over and go back to sleep when I heard something downstairs. A dull thump. I stayed still, listening. My house has this annoying habit of making noises at night. Wood creaking, pipes knocking, things settling. Normally I ignore it, but this sounded heavier, like something falling. I sat up slowly in bed. Probably the power outage, I whispered to myself. Something in the kitchen. Still, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The hallway outside my bedroom was dark and quiet. I stepped out and listened again. Nothing. The staircase leading down to the living room looked like a black tunnel. I started down slowly, lighting each step with my phone. Halfway down, I stopped. The front door was open, just a few inches. Cold air was drifting inside. I knew I had locked that door before going to bed. I always double-check it. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself maybe the wind pushed it open. But then I noticed something else. The small table next to the door had been moved, just slightly, like someone had brushed against it. A feeling of dread crawled up my spine. I whispered, "Hello." No answer. I took another step down the stairs, holding my phone tighter. That's when I heard breathing. Not mine, coming from somewhere in the living room. My body went completely still. The light from my phone barely reached past the bottom of the stairs, leaving most of the room in darkness. But I knew someone was there, standing somewhere in my house, breathing. I slowly backed up one step, then another, trying not to make a sound. The floor creaked slightly under my foot. The breathing stopped. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then I heard movement. Fast. Someone shifting position. I didn't wait to see who it was. I turned and ran back up the stairs, locking myself in my bedroom and dialing the police with shaking hands. While I was on the phone, I heard footsteps downstairs, drawers opening, something falling to the floor. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay quiet and stay in the room. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped. I heard the front door slam shut, and silence returned. When the police arrived, they searched the house. The living room had been rummaged through. My purse was on the floor, couch cushions tossed aside. But what really bothered one of the officers was the front door. The lock wasn't broken. There were no signs of forced entry. He looked at the door for a moment and then asked me something that made my stomach drop. "Do you ever leave this unlocked?" I shook my head immediately. "Never." He nodded slowly, then pointed to the floor near the door. There were muddy footprints leading inside, but only one set, and they didn't lead out. One of the officers checked the house again. Closets, bathroom, laundry room, the attic. Finally, he came back and said something I still think about sometimes. "Whoever it was must have left before we arrived." But the strange thing was, the muddy footprints still only went one way, into the house. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside a mid-sized city. Nothing exciting ever really happens here. The loudest thing most nights is usually someone's dog barking or a car driving by too fast. The night this happened started like any other. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, around 9:40 p.m. I had just gotten home from work, heated up some leftovers, and sat down on the couch with my laptop. I remember I was halfway through a YouTube video when suddenly everything went black. The TV shut off. The kitchen lights died. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator stopped. For a moment, the silence was almost shocking. I thought maybe a breaker had tripped, But when I looked out the window, I could see the entire street was dark. The street lights were out. The houses across from me were pitch black. That's when I realized it wasn't just my house. The whole neighborhood had lost power. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Within a few minutes, I saw lights moving around outside. Other neighbors doing the same thing. People started stepping onto their porches. Across the street, a guy named Brian called out, "Did everyone lose power?" Someone farther down yelled back, "Yeah, whole block's out." A few cars slowly drove down the street with their headlights on. Without the streetlights, everything looked completely different. The neighborhood felt darker than usual, like the darkness was heavier somehow. A few of us stood outside talking. Someone said the power company website showed a citywide outage. Apparently something at a major substation had failed, so it looked like we might be sitting in the dark for a while. At first it felt kind of weird, but also strangely calm. Neighbors were chatting. Someone joked about it feeling like we were back in the 1800s. Then I noticed something odd. About 3 houses down from mine is a small 2-story house that belongs to an older couple. They travel a lot and weren't home that week. I knew this because they had told me a few days earlier they were visiting their daughter in another state. Normally when the power goes out, you see flashlights or people moving around inside houses. But that house was completely still. There was no lights, no movement. I didn't think much of it at the time. Around 20 minutes into the blackout, I heard a sound behind me. A car door slamming. It wasn't on the street. It sounded like it came from somewhere nearby, maybe between houses. I turned and pointed my phone light toward the direction of the sound. Nothing, just darkness and a couple of parked cars. Brian asked, "You hear that?" I nodded. We both scanned the area with our flashlights, but didn't see anyone. A minute later, a woman across the street suddenly said, "Wait, did someone just run through that yard?" Everyone looked toward the house she was pointing at. It was the same house, the one where the owners were out of town. At first, we couldn't see anything. Then someone's flashlight swept across the backyard fence. For a split second, I swear I saw a figure move behind it, just a shadow slipping past the edge of the light. Brian walked a little closer to the sidewalk and shouted, "Hello?" No response. The street suddenly got quiet. Before that moment, everyone had been talking and joking around, but now it felt different. A couple of neighbors started wondering if maybe someone had cut through the yard because of the blackout. But then someone else said something that made the whole situation a lot worse. "The people who live there aren't even home." Everyone looked at the house again. The front porch was dark. The windows were dark. And then someone noticed something none of us had seen before. The front door was slightly open. Not wide open, just enough that the edge of it caught the beam of a flashlight. Brian muttered, "That door wasn't open earlier." At that point, nobody wanted to get too close. We didn't know if someone had broken in or if maybe there was some other explanation. But one thing was obvious. If someone had broken in, the blackout was the perfect cover. There will be no cameras, no alarms, no streetlights, just darkness. About 10 minutes later, while we were still standing there debating what to do, someone at the far end of the street suddenly yelled, "Hey!" We all turned. A man was walking down the road from the direction of the empty house. He was carrying something in his hand, what looked like a backpack or a duffel bag. One of the neighbors shined a bright flashlight directly at him. The man stopped. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Brian said, "Hey, what are you doing?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned and ran. He sprinted between 2 houses and disappeared into the darkness behind them. A couple people tried running after him, but with the power out and no lights anywhere, it was impossible to see where he went. Someone called the police. They showed up about 15 minutes later, just as the power finally came back on. Street lights flickered to life one by one, and the whole neighborhood suddenly looked normal again. But the police went straight to the house where the door had been open. About half an hour later, they came back outside and talked to us. 3 houses on the street had been broken into during the blackout. The empty house, and 2 others where the owners were sleeping upstairs and had no idea anyone had been inside. The man we saw running was never caught, and the police said something that still bothers me when I think about that night. They told us that during big blackouts like that, criminals sometimes drive around looking for dark neighborhoods. Because once the power goes out, they know security systems and cameras usually stop working, which means the guy we saw that night probably wasn't just walking through our street by accident. What scared me the most is to think that during that time, criminals can walk among us and we can even see them. They could do unspeakable things to people without being seen or caught. That's really scary. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. I remember because I had just shut my laptop after finishing some work emails. My house was completely quiet except for the dishwasher running in the kitchen. I was walking down the hallway toward my bedroom when everything suddenly went dark. The lights shut off. The dishwasher stopped mid-cycle. Even the small hum of the refrigerator disappeared. Just silence. I stood there for a second, waiting for the lights to flicker back on, but they didn't. Seriously? I sighed. Power outages happen sometimes where I live, especially when it's windy. I grabbed my phone from the table and turned on the flashlight. The beam lit up the living room in a narrow cone of white light. Everything looked normal. I went to the kitchen drawer where I keep candles and lit one, placing it on the counter. The flame flickered, making the shadows on the walls move slightly. I checked my phone again. No signal bars for a moment, then they came back. Before I could text anyone, I heard something outside. A dull metallic sound. At first I assumed it was just something blowing around in the wind. My backyard has a metal gate that sometimes rattles. But then it happened again. Closer this time. The sound came from the side of the house, the side where my back door is. I held the candle and slowly walked toward the kitchen window that faces the backyard. The glass reflected my face more than anything outside. The yard was completely dark because the streetlights on my block were out too. I leaned closer to the glass. That's when I saw movement. Just for a second, a shadow passing along the fence. My first thought was that it was a neighbor checking their yard, but then I heard the sound again. Not metal this time, the slow scrape of something against wood. My back door. My stomach dropped instantly. I turned off my phone flashlight and blew out the candle without even thinking. The house fell into complete darkness. I didn't want anyone outside to know I was inside. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the walls. Then came the sound I'll never forget. Someone testing the door handle, slowly, turning it once, then again. The door didn't open. I always lock it before bed. There was a pause outside, then footsteps on the wooden deck. 2 people. I know that sound now. At the time I didn't want to believe it, but it was clearly more than one set of footsteps. One of them whispered something. I couldn't hear the words. Then I heard something slide across the door. Metal against metal. They were trying to force the lock. My legs felt like they were made of cement. I slowly backed away from the kitchen, staying low, trying not to make a sound. I moved toward the living room and crouched behind the couch. That's when I heard a loud thud. They had kicked the door. The frame shook slightly. Another thud, this one louder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I dialed 911 but kept my voice as quiet as possible when the operator answered. I think someone's trying to break into my house, I whispered. She told me to stay hidden and that officers were already on the way. The men outside kicked the door again. The wood cracked this time. Then suddenly everything stopped. No more kicking, no more whispers, just silence. I stayed frozen behind the couch for what felt like forever, staring toward the kitchen doorway. Then I heard something that made my stomach twist. Footsteps, but not outside. Inside the house. From the hallway behind me. For a moment I thought I was going to pass out. I hadn't heard a window break. I hadn't heard a door open, but someone was inside. I held my breath and slowly turned my head toward the hallway. And then I heard something, a voice, low and irritated. "Cops are coming. Let's go." Footsteps rushed down the hallway. A door slammed somewhere in the house. Then the sound of someone jumping over the backyard fence. A minute later, red and blue lights flashed through my living room windows. The police searched the entire house. They found the back door frame cracked from the kicks. But that wasn't how the men got inside. One of the officers came back inside holding something in a small evidence bag. My spare key, the one I kept hidden under a rock near the back door. He held it up and looked at me. "You might want to find a better place to hide this," he said calmly. "Anyone who's done this before knows exactly where to look." I stared at the key in his hand, which meant the men outside hadn't just been trying doors. They knew exactly what they were doing. The blackout started so suddenly that for a second I thought something was wrong with my car. One moment the streetlights were glowing across the road, and the next everything went completely dark. The traffic light ahead died, and the entire street fell into this deep, unnatural silence. I had just finished a late shift and was driving home a little after midnight. Normally the road I take is quiet, but not empty. There are always a few cars passing, lights in apartment windows, something. But that night, after the blackout, it felt like the whole town had disappeared. My headlights were the only light left on the road. I slowed down and pulled to the side for a moment, trying to figure out if the power had gone out everywhere or if it was just the block. When I looked in the rearview mirror, that's when I noticed the car. It was parked on the other side of the street, completely dark. No headlights, no interior lights, just a black shape sitting there. I probably wouldn't have thought much of it, except for one thing. When I had driven past that exact spot about 10 seconds earlier, there was no car there. I was sure of it. I told myself maybe I had just missed it in the dark. My eyes were tired after work anyway. I shifted the car back into drive and continued slowly down the road. The strange thing was, as soon as I started moving again, I saw headlights appear in my mirror. The same car. It had turned its lights on and started driving behind me. At first, it kept a normal distance, maybe 2 or 3 car lengths back. But the road was empty, and the darkness made everything feel closer than it really was. After about a minute, I noticed something else. The headlights behind me would occasionally turn off for a second, then turn back on. It happened 3 times. I tried to ignore it, but every time the lights went dark, the car disappeared completely in the mirror. It felt like it wasn't really there until the lights came back. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Then the lights went out again, but this time, they didn't come back. I kept driving for another 10 seconds before slowly checking the mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was completely empty. The car was gone. I told myself they must have turned down another street while their lights were off. It wasn't impossible. Still, the whole thing left a strange feeling in my chest. A few minutes later, I reached the old intersection near the closed gas station. The power was still out everywhere. No lights, no people. I stopped the car for a second, mostly to calm my nerves. That's when I noticed something in the side mirror. Headlights again. The same car had turned onto the road behind me. I didn't understand how it got there so fast, but now it was definitely following me. My heart started beating faster. I decided to test something. Instead of continuing home, I suddenly turned right onto a small side street that almost nobody uses at night. The car behind me followed. Now I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I made another turn, then another. Each time the same headlights appeared behind me. At that point, I didn't want to drive home anymore. If someone really was following me, I didn't want them to know where I lived. So I headed toward the only place that might still have people around at night, the police station downtown. The moment I turned onto the main road that leads there, the car behind me suddenly slowed down. Then it turned off onto a different street and disappeared, just like that. I didn't stop driving until I reached the police station parking lot. Even though the power was still out, there were emergency lights on and a few officers outside dealing with the blackout situation. I told one of them what happened. He didn't laugh or act like I was crazy. He just nodded and then asked me a few questions about the car. He told me it's not unusual for certain people to drive around looking for drivers who are alone on dark roads. Sometimes they try to get the driver to pull over. Sometimes they follow them home. He said the smartest thing I did was drive somewhere public instead of going home. I still take that same road sometimes after work, but ever since that night, whenever the lights flicker or the street suddenly gets too quiet, I always check the mirror behind me